Well, it's a reasonable enough policy proposal. There were a whole lot of moving parts behind the general idea. So the most well-elaborated version of that is probably Sanders, which is pretty close to free college for just about any circumstance, including trade schools, by the way, in addition to community colleges in 4 years. But even his proposal is limited to public sector higher education institutions. It's kind of hard to find. Well, on the Republican side, you have some support for loan forgiveness and not so much free college, but they would tend to extend that to private higher education institutions as well. The Democratic side is pretty much all in the public sphere. And depending a bit on whose plan you look at, it can be pretty expensive. You know, we could be talking trillions of dollars if we're talking about forgiving all student debt. There's several different things that could be forgiven or just never paid for in the first place. The proposals include things like free tuition, not having to pay fees is kind of a major side issue there. But student debt forgiveness is really going to be the big ticket item because we have, well, a couple of generations at least that now have accumulated really huge amounts of student debt. One argument in favor of eliminating that student debt load is it'll stimulate the economy, because then people who otherwise have sort of marginal income situations who have more money to spend on stuff like, well, houses, cars, and some other not quite so big ticket items. So that can be very stimulative, and it could more or less, over the long haul, you could argue pay for itself even. There are other major issues involving higher education that we may want to address just briefly. One thing that's really closely connected to higher education, but also clearly spills over to the K-12 set of issues, is how much teachers get paid. So we have a huge problem with teachers bailing from the profession. Now, the teachers are trained at the higher education institutions to, in turn, more or less train K-12 students. And if they're not adequately compensated or given good, safe environments to operate in, they're not going to stick around. So we have a huge turnover rate. The safety issues are important, but in addition to that, paying teachers a livable salary would help quite a bit. So fresh out of an undergraduate degree, a lot of teachers aren't going to make six-figure salaries, obviously. Sanders has proposed, just as one example, a $60,000 floor on starting teacher salaries. That's well above where most Iowa teachers are going to start. So in the Iowa context, this could be part of a rising tide that lifts other boats too. Again, it could stimulate the economies of Iowa towns and cities. It would probably make it a whole lot more attractive for people to go into the teaching professions.